The Kung Fu Man. For generations, it has been the epitome of Asian American representation in Hollywood and the American media. It's cool. It shows talent. It's badass. But is this the best we can do? Or have we reached a glass ceiling built from decades of reinforcing that all of the movies where an Asian is the star are the ones where he or she is a kung fu master? Tell me, when you think of the most recent film with an Asian lead, what did you think of? One of the first things that probably popped in your head was Shang-Chi, The Legends of the Ten Rings. Now don't get me wrong, it was a fantastic film with some excellent representation. But what was the lead's significance? He was a kung fu master. I had recently read a book that had shined light on this very issue. Charles Yu's Interior Chinatown. It details the story of Willis Wu, an Asian American actor who works his way up the ladder from a background character on a basic TV show all the way up to Kung Fu Master. Sure, this sounds simple, but the book also details the stereotyping and racism that exists in the American film industry. The fact that it is a flawed system. Charles Yu uses Willis Wu as a vessel to demonstrate the flaws, struggles, and sacrifices that it takes for Willis to achieve his dream. By the end of the novel, we ask ourselves, what does it truly mean to be an Asian American working in an American society where there is an agenda and system in near every industry? Charles Yu's Interior Chinatown is a deep dive into the gritty and difficult life of the Asian American actor as he struggles to make his way to the top. The top that Hollywood carved and engraved into nearly every Asian American. Join me as we take a deep dive into the novel and explore Willis Wu's journey while also exploring his idealization of becoming the Kung Fu guy as a result of the broken system that is Hollywood. Before we get started, let's quickly look into Asian representation in Hollywood and the American film industry. Hollywood has been notorious for racism and placing minorities in stereotypical roles. For decades, minorities have been cast simply in minor side roles. Asians in particular have been cast as foreigners with heavy accents like this.
Very clever dinner. Appetizing food fitting neatly into interesting round.
Or of course, the martial artist. Yes, even now, this is still happening. In Nancy Wang Yuan's novel, Real Inequality, she elaborates on how racism has been displayed within Hollywood. One point she iterates is that for a long time, minorities weren't even cast to play minorities. Instead, a method called whitening was used. Whitening is when white people use makeup to change the shade of their skin to play a different colored person. It really wasn't until Bruce Lee came onto the scene introducing Kung Fu to America that we really saw Asian representation change in Hollywood. You can even say that he revolutionized the industry by introducing a whole new genre to America, the martial arts film. While it's great that this catapulted Asian representation in the industry, this came at a price, a new stereotype, and a glass ceiling resulting from it. It became the role that Asian actors coveted as the best role they could play, the apex of the pyramid. It became a part of the Hollywood system. In Yuan's novel, she also makes this statement. Within this system, actors of color are often caught in a vicious cycle, wherein they have few opportunities to become bankable stars, making them financial risks, which in turn limits their role prospects and prominence. Today, we now have white actors infiltrating and contending for even this coveted Kung Fu star role that Asian actors desire so much. With shows such as Iron Fist, we can see a white man as the Kung Fu lead and Asian actors being sidelined to side. This only makes it more difficult for aspiring Asian actors to become successful. Charles Yu, a veteran within the industry, makes a powerful statement about these very issues in his novel Interior Chinatown, as we follow the story of the protagonist, Willis Wu. Charles Yu does a brilliant job of addressing the issues of racism, stereotyping, struggle, sacrifice, and the fundamentally flawed system Hollywood is in his novel Interior Chinatown. If you haven't heard of Charles Yu, he is an award-winning novelist and writer. He is most notably known as a writer and story editor for multiple episodes of the hit show Westworld. So he has established himself quite well within the industry. As someone who grew up in LA, the heart of filmography, it is evident Will wants to use this novel to shrug off Asian stereotypes. He proved this not only in the story, but in multiple interviews in which we can obtain insight on youth mentality and thoughts on Asian representation and how it's reached a glass ceiling that needs to be broken through. In Yu's interview with Trevor Noah from Tackling On-Screen Asian Representation with Interior Chinatown, Yu details the various themes within the novel, such as making it big and the challenges Asian Americans face in society. He also talks of his inspiration for creating this novel with the discussion of the model minority.
The model minority is just sort of the age-old strategy of divide and conquer. And holding one group up justifies holding a group apart. And it's not just your sort of saying Asians have it good, you're kind of showing the other groups you could do it too, right?
Right.
And also the fact is there are plenty of Asians who have not succeeded.
Right.
There are the characters in this book are struggling economically, they're struggling to assimilate culturally, and that's a story that we don't see as often. We see in the media stories about Asian American success, but not always this story.
As you can see, even with his success, Charles Yu is very aware of the problems within the industry, and I believe he is using Interior Chinatown as a vessel to inform the world of the issues and struggles Asian Americans face to succeed in the world. Through the characterization and story of Willis Wu in Interior Chinatown, we can observe that Yu uses Willis and his story arc to show the struggle and hunger of the everyday Asian American that is trying to get by and find success in this cutthroat industry. Yu demonstrate this in a very unique way as the story is told in script format. By telling the story in the lens of a script, we are able to learn much more about the background of the characters and their skills and traits, not through exposition, but through a backdrop. This unique method not only diverges from traditional storytelling, but also gives us information about the characters and the world around them even before the first line of dialogue is spoken. For example, we can observe these excerpts from the backdrop of the hierarchy in black and white the show Willis is cast in. It also informs us of how expendable the side characters are. In the same backdrop, we are also given insight into how revered the role of Kung Fu guy is, and how much Willis desires to one day obtain his role. This is his dream, his ultimate goal. In this story, Yu characterizes Willis Wu as a man whose sole ambition is to become the Kung Fu guy. This is evident even in the very beginning of the text, it is reiterated multiple times. Ever since you were a boy, you've dreamt of being Kung Fu guy. You are not Kung Fu guy. You are currently background Oriental male. But you've been practicing. Maybe tomorrow will be the day. Yu uses this backdrop not only to give us background information, but to also show us Willis's thoughts. Wu idealizes Bruce Lee as a legend, describing him. He was a living, breathing video game boss level, a human cheat code. an idealized avatar of Asianness and awesomeness permanently set on expert difficulty. This demonstrates how major of an impact Bruce Lee had on the industry, especially representing Asians. And though Willis and his idealization of the wall of Kung Fu guy, Yu makes us aware of this very fact. We are made aware that this has been Willis's aspiration ever since he was a boy, as he boldly states, "Someday I'm going to be Bruce Lee." Despite this, his mother never approved of this, as she wanted him to be more. Along with Willis's aspirations, Yu also displays the difficult life of an aspiring Asian actor when introducing the Chinatown SRO, the single-room occupancy apartments. Through Willis's perspective, we can explore how claustrophobic, desperate, and resigned many of the occupants are. We also explore the dynamic of Willis's strained relationship with his parents, as he can't even bring himself to see his own parents out of guilt. Furthermore, the idea of the unrealized American dream is a consistent theme across this novel. Charles Yu uses Willis's continued exposure to many second and even third generation Asian Americans to highlight just how many people are stuck in a system of oppression and degradation, who have already resigned themselves to the fact that they aren't good enough to make it. Of every superstar that is born, there are probably hundreds that end up being stuck believing they'll be nothing more than an extra or side character. Even as Willis begins to emerge as a character of more significance, he soon learns the harsh reality that in doing so, he is sacrificing himself to the broken system of the Hollywood film industry. As Willis makes his first big break in Black and White, the theme of racism is again reiterated. Even though he is now promoted to special guest star, the stars only refer to him as Asian guy. It is here that Charles Yu makes a powerful statement on the flawed industry that is known as Hollywood. As Willis rebukes about being known as simply Asian guy, Turner, a lead star, makes Willis aware that he put himself in this position by going along with the broken system. They both have. As the argument reaches its climax, Willis asks Turner if he's insinuating that he is the model minority. Though it is never explicitly stated, it is strongly implied. While writing Interior Chinatown, Charles Yu had strong opinions on the flawed system that is Hollywood. In Rob Harvia's article and interview, The Multiple Dimensions of Charles Yu, Yu demonstrates his knowledge and opinion on what it is like being in a system and how systems exhibit across all industries. You never know when you'll find, ex-lawyers. There are ex-lawyers everywhere. I am one myself. That's the ultimate, A third year gets paid different from a fourth year and a fifth year. So I've been in a system. I've also been in writers' rooms now on TV for a few years. It's actually a very similar system. You can get a different title every year as long as you keep moving up. And so I've never beat any system, that's for sure. I've been beaten by systems, but yes, in the course of writing the story, what I wanted for this character is both to have success, but realize that success can come with certain costs, and that it wasn't going to go the way he thought it was going to go. As we can see, Charles Yu's intention is to illuminate us on the fact that these flawed systems exist everywhere. For Willis Wu, it's the American film industry. He does gain success. He rises up the ranks, but it comes with many sacrifices. As we just observed, Turner informs Willis of this very fact. Even Willis's parents, who are seasoned actors, wish better for him. This can be displayed when his mother says, "I want you to be better," as stated earlier. His father also says, "I want better for you," with a resigned look as he sees that Willis is entering the system. Even with all the warnings that the life and journey to become Kung Fu Man is not worth it, he still goes to pursue his dream that he's desired since he was a little boy. By now we know that it is difficult to succeed in the Hollywood system. As we observed in The Multiple Dimensions of Charles Yu, Yu mentions that success comes with certain costs, and that it wasn't going to go the way he thought it was going to go. We can observe a precursor to this with Willis's father, Ming Chen Wu. In the past, he successfully got the role, but it cost him his sanity. He lost himself to the role, to the stereotype. He realized that this coveted role is not what he expected it to be. He was not happy. He turned to alcoholism and pushed his family away. In an excerpt, it states, "This is how he became Sifu. This is how she lost her husband. And this is how you lost your dad." Cost and sacrifice can come in many forms. For Willis's father, it was alcoholism, shutting his family out. It can be argued that sacrifices Willis makes are far greater. He falls in love with an up-and-coming star, Karen Lee. They marry and soon bear a child. All while Willis continues to strive for his singular goal of Kung Fu Man, which at this point is in tunnel vision. He becomes a recurring star now, and the director tells him that he is in the grasp of this coveted role that will come any day. As a result, they see each other less often. At the same time, Karen informs Willis that she landed her own starring show. But alas, there's a cost. Sacrifices need to be made. Karen's show is located in the suburbs, far from Chinatown. She even made plans for Willis to play a major role, but this would cost Willis his dream. It would cost him Kung Fu Guy. Charles Yu has hinted throughout the novel that Willis's sole fixation and obsession is to be Kung Fu Guy. As I've mentioned before, every act begins with the same line. Ever since you were a boy, you've dreamt of being Kung Fu Guy. You are not Kung Fu Guy. As a result, Willis does not take Karen's offer well. He is so fixated on getting the coveted role that he's blind to the opportunity of a lifetime, a successful life with his new family. Karen expresses her doubt on whether he will even land the role, and fears that he will end up trapped just like his father. Willis, on the other hand, rebukes that everything is about obtaining the role of Kung Fu Guy, nothing else. He states, "This is the dream. This is what someone like me has available to them." Through these very words, we can see that Willis has become ensnared in the system. He has become so blinded that he is choosing this role, which at this point isn't even secured over his own family. He has become just another cog. Alas, Willis does become Kung Fu Guy, but at what cost? He is now alone, and it is then, after he achieves his goal, that he finally realizes, this is not worth it. I'm still a part of the system. Karen was right. You are trapped. Doing well is a trap. A different kind, but still a trap. Because you're still in a show that doesn't have a role for you. This very realization coincides with Charles Yu's mentality and experiences of the cost of success, as well as leaving a system he is unsatisfied with for another one. After this epiphany, Willis decides to steal Turner's car and drive off to his family. While I wish I could say Willis meets with his family, they reconcile, and live happily ever after, Charles Yu created this novel with a powerful level of realism. That being said, the chances of a fairy tale ending happening is probably equal to the chances of seeing a shooting star if you walk out the door right now. Willis does go to his family, but the love that he and Karen once shared is but a far cry of what it once was. They are now divorced. Willis is branded as an absentee father, but his daughter, Phoebe, forgives him. Cost, sacrifice, what could have been, and what is. As Willis gets to know his daughter, he realizes how much he appreciates and loves her. He realizes that nothing can be better than being important, relevant, recognized. He says, "You were a big player in the world of black and white, but here and now, in her world, you are more. Not the star of the show, something better. The star's dad. Somehow, you were lucky enough to end up in her story." Unfortunately, not soon after Willis does get settled in, the police show up and arrest him. But he knew this was coming. He wanted to show his former production that he has broken free from the system. Before the trial begins, Charles Yu uses the backdrop to list various discriminatory laws towards Asians. This is a powerful setup for what's to come in a trial, in which the focus is the mistreatment of the Asian people and their representation. In the very opening of the trial, we see Willis's long-lost brother show up as his attorney. They briefly reconcile, but it's important to note that Willis's brother disappeared because he knew he did not want to be a part of the system. And now Willis understands this. They say, "I never left. Not really. Not in the way that counts. Inside. In my mind, another part of me is in a different place now. Interior Chinatown isn't the whole world anymore. I had to leave my own way, just like you tried to do." Ironic that Charles Yu used to be a lawyer and left the system for Hollywood, while older brother did the exact opposite. Coincidence? I think not. Charles Yu utilizes this whole trial as a representation of the status quo and his commentary on it. In the very beginning, it is evident that bias exists. As Turner and Green testify, they give their own opinions of the status quo of the industry while attempting to belittle Willis. Turner argues that Willis hasn't had it as bad as black people. Green argues that plenty of people are persecuted based on their gender, looks, or age, and questions whether Willis simply wants to be treated like a white man. As older brother rebukes, the truth of the matter is Willis wants to be treated like an American, and Americans have no color. Older brother further goes on to solidify his argument about how Asians are misrepresented through the very title of the show, Black and White. The show isn't called Black, White, and Yellow, simply Black and White. He argues that by this very nature, the studio is using the black experience as the model for the Asian immigrant, or even dialed down, yet it isn't. He later states, "The real history of yellow people in America, 200 years of being perpetual foreigners. They zoned us, kept us roped off from everyone else, trapped us inside, cut us off from our families, our history, so we made it our own place. Chinatown, place for preservation and self-preservation." Willis is guilty of wanting to be a part of something that never wanted him. Just because this novel is fiction doesn't mean this isn't true. Asians throughout America face this injustice and are trapped within this system. Even with a thorough defense, Willis is still found guilty. In a final soliloquy, after he has discovered who he truly is and accepted the mistakes he's made, he tells the court, "Ever since I was a boy, I've dreamt of being Kung Fu guy. I practiced all those years dreaming of tomorrow, of the next day, of the day it would come. And then one day, finally, after waiting however many decades for it, after many nights staring at the ceiling or my poster of Bruce Lee or hearing Sifu's words in my head, I finally got my shot. And when I did, you know what? I thought, I wonder why I wanted this so bad. Kung Fu guy is just another form of generic Asian man." He goes on to state that he is guilty of letting the role define him, falling prey to the broken system, internalizing the role so completely that he lost track of reality. He continues to describe how his obsession with the role destroyed his self-confidence, and they made him feel unworthy of others. But he's realized that he isn't just generic Asian man. They aren't generic Asian men. They are all real and unique people. Charles Yu's Interior Chinatown takes us into the cutthroat world of Hollywood through the lens of the Asian American actor. Through his creation of Willis Wu, we see the gritty and desperate side of the ones who don't become superstars, but rather the ones who play the background character or side character. Throughout Willis's journey, we see just how broken the Hollywood system is. People are expendable. Actors develop obsessions over roles they covet to the point they lose their very own sense of self-identity and are willing to sacrifice the things most important to them just to land a simple role. In the end, Willis was able to realize he was following in his father's footsteps, and he caught himself before he was boxed in. Many others are not so lucky. Perhaps with this novel and one similar, we raise exposure of Asian American representation and struggle. After all, things aren't just black and white. There's a whole spectrum of color.